Good evening and welcome to Mining the Riches of the Parsha. Tonight is Thursday night, May 2nd, 2024. I am thrilled to be with you all tonight, to be able to study together. And hopefully, we're now back at 7 p.m. Hopefully, we'll be able to stay there at 7 p.m. consistently. This week's Torah portion, the Parsha of Acharei Mot, is the unexpected or surprising end of an amazing story that we've been following for quite some time. And it is the beginning of a major historical shift in Jewish life. And it began with the Egel, the sin of the golden calf, all the way back in the book of Shemos. 40 days after Mount Sinai, the Jewish people sinned with the golden calf. And you remember, Moshe saved everything. Moshe went back to Hashem and he said, the first thing God says is, listen, that's it, forget it. I'm going to wipe out these people and we'll start over with you with a new nation. And Moshe says, no. If you're going to do that, I don't want to be the one to do that. No starting over. And Moshe prays to Hashem. And finally, Hashem forgives the Jewish people for the sin of the golden calf. And Moshe comes back down to the Jewish people with the second set of luchos, the tablets of the Ten Commandments. And the day that he comes down is the day that verifies that God had in fact forgiven the Jewish people for the sin of the golden calf. And our Torah portion, the Parsha of Acharei Mot, is the conclusion of that story. And the promise that the forgiveness of the Jewish people by God for the golden calf is not a one-time thing, but actually will be an annual event. It will become institutionalized as Yom Kippur, as a day of atonement, with specific rituals, so that every year we are able forever to recreate the first time that Moshe came down with the two tablets, expressing that God had forgiven the Jewish people. So it transforms what was a one-time event of God forgiving the Jewish people for a specific sin, the golden calf, into an annual event where every year God is willing to forgive the Jewish people if we are sincere in asking for forgiveness and in improving our ways. And the way that we do that is the subject of the beginning of this week's Torah portion. The Torah says, Bezos yavo el HaKodesh. God says, this is how I want you to come into the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur in order to recreate that first Yom Kippur in order for the atonement to take place on Yom Kippur. And so we have, in short form, the whole service of Yom Kippur in the Beit HaMikdash, in the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, as the beginning of our Torah portion. And the Torah says, Ki b'yom hazeh, because on this day of Yom Kippur, every single year, Yechaper alechem, God says, I will forgive you, L'taher eschem, and purify you from the mistakes that you have made, Mikol chatosechem, from all of the sins that have been done, Lifnei Hashem titoro, you will stand before God purified, forgiven, cleansed of sin. And this recurs every year based on Moshe not accepting God's first answer, that's it, it's over, I'm wiping out the Jewish people. But Moshe's willingness to sacrifice himself for the Jewish people, and Moshe's prayers for forgiveness of the Jewish people, which also become our prayers every single year on Yom Kippur? It's all because of Moshe. And Moshe alone, exclusively. Moshe is responsible for this incredible institution recurring on an annual basis. And as we see in our Torah portion, Acharei Mot, Moshe has no role on Yom Kippur. Only Aharon. Aharon, his brother, is the one who does all the rituals, performs the sacrifices, achieves the forgiveness. It's very odd because remember, Aharon was somehow, it's not clear exactly, somehow Aharon was involved in that sin of the golden calf. He built it, he made it, he allowed it, that's mysterious also, but he was somewhat involved. Moshe is the only person that had nothing to do with it, right? Because remember, he was at the top of Mount Sinai. He wasn't there. And he is exclusively responsible for all of the atonement. Why is it given to Aharon to be the person to do, and Moshe have no role whatsoever? So the answer I want to share with you, there may be other answers, but this is a true answer. And that is that the job is not always given to the one who deserves the greatest honor. The job is given to the one who needs it and who can use it the most. Now, every indication that we have from the Torah is that Moshe was not only not disappointed, but happy for his brother Aharon, and accepted God's instruction without complaint. But that's Moshe. Most people are not like that. People often get upset if they are not chosen, if they're not recognized, if they're not honored, if they're not listed. And I'm talking about when they deserve it and they're entitled to it. How come I wasn't acknowledged? How come I wasn't mentioned? How come my name wasn't there? And the truth is that people cause themselves a lot of agmas nefesh, a lot of upset feelings, leaving aside the difficulties they often cause to nonprofit organizations. I'll leave that to the side. But they cause themselves a lot of difficulty, a lot of anger, a lot of upset at not being recognized or chosen when we think that we should be. And Moshe should teach us a lesson. Because when it comes to Yom Kippur, no one deserved it like him. In fact, no one else deserved it at all. But in God's eyes, it was better that this duty go to Aharon. And for many things in life, God decides. God calls the shots. And when we realize that, it can have a profound effect on every area of our lives. I heard this story from Rabbi Meilech Biderman. So there was a young man who was studying in yeshiva, a Torah scholar, and he came to his teacher, his Rebbe, and he said, Rebbe, I need help. I have a problem. I have a personal problem. I often lose my temper. I get enraged. I yell at other people. I know it's wrong, but I can't help myself. What should I do? So the Rebbe told this young man the following story. And the story goes like this. There was once a group of thieves on a boat. And they boarded the boat as regular passengers. And the plan was that in the middle of the voyage, they would seize the control room, they would take over the ship, and they would bring it to a place that they wanted to bring it to, where they would rob all the passengers. They didn't want to hurt anybody. God forbid, they didn't want to kill anybody. They just wanted to rob everybody of their money and their jewels. That was the plan. Before they made their move, during the voyage, a fight broke out between the sailors. One group of sailors wanted to stop at an island they were passing, and the other group of sailors wanted to hurry to their destination. And while the two groups of sailors were fighting and yelling with each other, the thieves said to themselves, "This is the perfect opportunity." So they broke into the control room and they took over the ship. They tied up all the sailors. Now they're prisoners. And they took control of this ship. That's the end of the story. So the Rebbe said to this man, to this young man who had this problem with anger, he asked him the following question. He said, now consider the two groups of soldiers. They're now tied up. Are they still angry with each other? Are they still fighting with each other? So the young man said no, because now they're in danger. They have bigger problems than which island they're going to stay on. They have bigger problems, so they're not angry anymore. But the teacher said, wait a second, but they were not in any danger, remember. Only the passengers were being robbed and they weren't going to be hurt. And the sailors were just tied up to keep them from interfering. Yet now the sailors were quiet. What happened? Did their anger just dissipate? Were they suddenly quiet and not yelling at each other? So the Rebbe says to the young man, go home and think about it overnight. And come back tomorrow and tell me what you think. The young man goes home. He comes back the next day. And he says to his teacher, he says, now I understand. I understand why they stopped yelling. Because their anger stemmed from each side thinking that they were in charge. And when they couldn't get their way, because the other group of sailors thought that they were in charge, they were angry. One group said, we're in charge, and we say to stop here at this island. And the other group says, no, we're in charge, and we want to keep going. So they were yelling and fighting. But once they were tied up, both groups realized that neither of them was in charge. Neither group was in control. The decision was not theirs to make. It was made for them. And so there was no reason for their anger and their yelling. The Rebbe said to this young man, if you can keep this story in mind, you will be able to control your anger. When you think that you're actually in charge and you're the boss, well, if you're the boss and something doesn't go your way, you're angry. But when you realize that God is in charge, you realize that everything is going to follow God's plan. So there's no room for anger. And there's no room for yelling. So this week's Torah portion, Acharei Mot, which presents the rituals of Yom Kippur, is set with a very specific context. It begins as follows. Vayedaber Hashem Moshe, God speaks to Moshe, Acharei Mot Shnei Bnei Aharon, after the death of the two sons of Aharon, B'kar Vasam Lifnei Hashem, when they came close and brought an offering to God, Vayamusu, and they died. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, God said to Moshe, Dabel Aharon achicha, speak to your brother Aharon. Va'al yavo b'chol eisa hakodesh, don't just come in whenever you want. Bezos yavo Aharon el hakodesh, I want you to come in to do these rituals on Yom Kippur into the Holy of Holies, and that's what the Torah describes. Now, you remember a few weeks ago, we discussed this in the Parsha of Shmini, where during the inauguration, celebration of the Mishkan, when it was finally put into effect, there was a terrible tragedy, and Aharon's two oldest sons died. And you remember we discussed at that time, it's a very, very frightening passage and very, very hard to understand. What did they do? What did they do wrong? And whatever it was that they did, how is it deserving such a terrible punishment? And I share it with you then. I find it impossible to understand and very, very upsetting, frightening. And clearly, our Torah portion is locating the rituals of Yom Kippur within the context of a response to whatever it was that those two sons of Aharon did. Again, that just makes it more difficult to understand as far as I'm concerned. But you remember we did discuss back in the Parsha of Shmini, when this terrible, tragic event occurred, the response of Aharon, Vayidom Aharon, and Aharon was silent. I shared with you one approach to understanding that silence. But the truth is, I shared then, there are many different opinions about what Aharon's response actually was. It's not at all clear what Aharon meant with his silence. And I must confess, I really don't think that I understand what the Torah is saying. I shared one insight, but I don't feel that I have the whole thing. What I do have tonight is a story. And so I offer you this story to try to put Aharon's response in a human context. And I also offer it in advance of Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Memorial Day, which is this Sunday night and Monday. There are events going on specifically on Sunday night. I hope you'll join me, and other ways to mark this very solemn and important day. And so I offer this story in memory of the Kedoshim, those who were murdered during the Holocaust, and in honor to pay tribute to the survivors and their children and their grandchildren. And it's a story that I heard many, many years ago from Rabbi Yisroel Meir Lau, who formerly was the Ashkenazi chief rabbi of Israel. I've quoted him to you many, many times. But this is an incredible story. You remember he was in Buchenwald. He survived the Holocaust. He was one of the youngest to survive Buchenwald. He was 8 years old when the Holocaust ended, when he was liberated from Buchenwald. So they gathered together from Buchenwald, Bergen-Belsen, a group of children who were orphans. There were about 200 children. And they took them to a place to be safe. This is after the war. To regain their health, their strength. And so they were temporarily in this place. It was in France. And it was like a convalescent home. And there were about, as I say, 200 children there. And they had to learn, really, how to be able to live again. First, they had to be given food in very, very small increments so that it wouldn't overwhelm them. They had to learn to take care of their bodies. And in this place, there was a woman. Her name was Rachel Mince, of blessed memory, a Jewish woman. And she was the house mother. She was in charge of these 200 children. She spoke Polish, and Rabbi Lau said she was like a mother to them. One day it happened, after lunch, she announced that she's asking all of the children there to do her a favor. She said at 4 p.m. this afternoon, there will be a large group of very important guests who are going to come to this place. And the guests are the heads of all of the organizations that fund this institution. It was funded by charity. And so there's going to be the commander of the police and the governor and the mayor and the heads of the organizations, non-Jewish people, but who, out of the goodness of their hearts, and it's a tremendous mitzvah, were donating money to help these Jewish survivors, these children. And so she said, these non-Jewish people are going to be coming, and I'm asking you, she said, Mrs. Mince, she said, I'm asking you to please to come, dress nicely at 4 p.m., and there'll be speeches, and listen politely, and act nicely, and please do this favor for me. After Mrs. Mince left the lunchroom, a few of the older boys decided that they were going to protest. We're not going. We don't want anything to do with these people who, where were they during the war? What did they do to save our families, our mothers, our fathers? And now they want to, face their guilt or to show that now they're helping some Jewish children? We're not going. We're not going to go. And they want to come to have a photograph with us like we're some sort of act that they can show off how generous they are. And these children said, listen, leave us alone. We didn't ask for your help. You didn't give us any help. We don't want anything from you now. Leave us alone. We're not coming. So a group of these children went to Mrs. Mince. And they said, no, we're not coming. Now, obviously, Mrs. Mince understood what the children did not understand, is that without the financial support of these people, the place would not be able to help them. And they certainly would not be able to help the next group of orphans who were scheduled to come after these went to Israel. But she didn't say that to the boys. She said, they're going to bring you presents. And the boys said, we don't want their presents. We didn't ask for anything. We're not coming. And then she used her final argument, her final plea, which was the strongest thing. She says, okay, I understand. I'm asking you to do it for me. I'm asking you to do me a favor. You know what I've done for you. I'm asking this for me. Well, for the sake of Mrs. Mince, they had to do it. But they gave her a condition. They said, okay, we'll come, but we're not cooperating. We are protesting. We're going to be there, but we're protesting. And the way we're going to protest is, we'll come, We'll sit in the seats that you have for us, but we will not look at a single speaker. We're going to keep our eyes to the ground in protest. Years later, there was actually a photograph of this event. And you could see someone speaking, and you could see all these boys, and they had bald heads, right? Just come out of the concentration camps, and you see it's not funny. They're all sitting like this. You just see their bald heads because they were doing that. They were keeping their heads down. All right, fine. The guests come, and each one spoke, and Mrs. Mince translated the speeches into Polish so the children would understand. And it was clear that these children were not cooperating, not participating, not appreciating, but they were there. And then Mrs. Mince said, "There's one more speaker. The last speaker will be a Mr. Goldberg. Mr. Goldberg is a Polish Jew from Lodz. His wife and children were killed in Auschwitz. He survived. Before the war, he had a business in France, so after the war, he came to France. He was able to reestablish his business. And since his entire family had been murdered, he decided to donate all of the proceeds of his business to this place to support the work of helping these children." It wasn't planned, but all of a sudden, the eyes of 200 children lifted, and they looked at this man, because this is a Jewish man. This is a man whose family was murdered, like our families were murdered in the Holocaust. And we all looked at him, and we waited for him to speak. This man, Mr. Goldberg, was understandably very emotional. And when he saw that all of the children had lifted their eyes and they were looking at him, his emotions overflowed. He held on to the microphone and his hand was trembling. And he only managed to utter a few words. He said in Yiddish, "Mein teure Kinder," my beautiful children. And he started to cry. He couldn't go on. Among the children, there was dead silence. And suddenly, each of the children began to feel that their eyes were starting to water, and tears started to come down their cheeks. And they didn't want to do that. They didn't want to cry in front of all these people. And they were trying to hide. But it didn't help. And they all started to cry, sobbing. 200 children, crying, sobbing, releasing all of the emotion that had been stopped up for all those years during the Holocaust. And all of them, 200 children, cried out loud for about 5 minutes. After that, when everyone had calmed down a bit, one of the boys, he was 16 years old, he stood up and he spoke to the group. It was not planned. He spoke to the assembly. And he said, I'm standing up now because I want to thank you. I'm not thanking you for the visit because we didn't ask you for the visit. I'm not thanking you for the presents because we don't want your presents. I want to thank you for one thing that you've done for us. Unintentionally. You have given us the ability to cry. And this is a big present for us because for the past couple of years, I have been thinking that I am not normal. Of course, I haven't laughed in the last 2 or 3 years. That's understandable after all that we went through. But in the last year or so, I started to worry that I had not shed a single tear with all the horrors that were happening to me. And I began to realize that something in me was frozen, it was numb. And I had heard that there was a concept called a heart of stone. And I was worried. I thought maybe that happened to me. That I would never again be able to laugh or to cry. And 5 minutes ago, we received from you this wonderful gift. That we're normal. That we can cry. And for that we thank you. It is a tremendous gift to be able to cry. And an even greater gift to allow someone else to cry. This year, Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Memorial Day, holds a uniquely tragic meaning for us. For many people, the barbaric cruelty of Hamas on October 7th and since triggers our collective memory of the Nazis. It was, in fact, the worst attack on Jews since the Holocaust. And worldwide, we are experiencing levels of anti-Semitism. Many of us were at McGill today. Many of us have never experienced this in our lives. Others of us have not experienced anything like this since the Holocaust. But precisely because of that, it is important to insist on the uniqueness of the Holocaust as our darkest era of history and to commemorate it accordingly in its own special category, separate from everything else. I shared this story with some of you before. It's a story told by Yoni Heilman in his Diary of an IDF Soldier, and it's a story he told while he was fighting in Gaza several months ago. A group of soldiers who had been serving in Gaza for several months, they were going home for leave, for a short leave. And one of these soldiers knew a Holocaust survivor. So he suggested to the others in his group, he said, when we leave, before we go home, let's visit this man, this Holocaust survivor. Let's hear his story. And let's hear what he's thinking about everything that's going on. It would be a very important perspective for us. So they go to this man, this Holocaust survivor. And they ask him, is this the Holocaust? Is this what it was like? You were there. We're experiencing something that we've never experienced in our young lives. Is this the Holocaust? And this man said to them, the brutality and the cruelty of Hamas matches the Nazis. But he said to them, but this is not the Holocaust. Today we have a state of Israel, which is strong, which cannot be threatened by Hamas. We have allies, important, strong allies who support us and who stand by us. And most of all, he said to these young soldiers, we have you, young men and women of the IDF, who are willing to risk their lives, sacrifice their lives, to protect the state of Israel, to protect the Jewish people. We had none of that in the Holocaust. This is bitter. This is dark. But this is not the Holocaust. You may have seen this on Facebook. It's been circulating recently. It's a double photo. I hope you can see it. On the top, there is a photo of a group of women. There are 4 women in the front. They are inmates in a concentration camp during the Holocaust. Below them, you see a photograph of 4 women, heavily armed, members of the IDF. And the caption says, now I just want to say there's a bit of controversy about this on Facebook, so I'm not taking any positions on this. But the caption reads, the Israeli soldiers in the photo are the granddaughters of the 4 women at the front of the line at a Nazi concentration camp. This is terrible. This is bitter. This is dark. But it is not the Holocaust. The Holocaust remains in its own unique category. And on Sunday night and Monday, we must focus on this, what the Holocaust is, and also the difference between then and now, in order to make the Holocaust Memorial Day, Yom HaShoah, a truly meaningful and solemn event. My friends, I wish you a good evening and a beautiful Shabbos, and I look forward to seeing you soon in person.